Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Lishe Bora. I am Zahra Mohammed, a registered dietitian and nutritionist with a passion for bringing you the latest insights from nutritional science, agriculture, and beyond. So today's topic of the day is nutrition and mental health. So we will be answering a few questions. One is, can nutrition and diet play a role in the treatment of mental illnesses? Can a change in diet actually treat psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia? Can a change in diet make the symptoms better or even go away for disorders such as anxiety, PTSD, or post traumatic stress disorder, OCD, also known as obsessive compulsive disorder, chronic depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and so on? So, most people are skeptical with regards to how much impact nutrition really has on our mental health, or particularly with improving the symptoms of individuals living with these challenges. And the reason is because these problems are typically seen as being caused by chemical imbalances. And so that's why medications are typically the first line of treatment. So people will either be put on antidepressants or antipsychotics, and typically the focus is usually on medication as well as therapy. And people rarely talk about nutrition. People rarely will assess, the dietary patterns of these individuals. So there are many factors that lead to the development of these mental disorders. There is genetics, hormones, substance abuse or the use of drugs, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, as well as stress. So when it comes to nutrition and diet, it's definitely not seen as a cause. It's never been listed as a cause or a reason behind any of these mental disorders. And when you look at the traditional treatment approaches, which is typically the use of medication as well as therapy, or what you would call counseling or social support, they do have their impact. However, in some cases, they tend to be suboptimal in terms of the results. So the individuals don't really report, a relief in the symptoms. There isn't really much of an improvement. And so this just highlights the need for a more comprehensive more comprehensive therapeutic strategies. So, welcome to the field of nutritional psychiatry, where controversies are abundant and wild claims are all over the internet, and you might have come across a few of these controversies. So, some may wonder, people living with these mental health challenges, for example, should they be eating meat or not? Are carbs the enemy, or are they essential? Is low fat what they should be eating? Is that the definition of a healthy diet? Should they be taking vitamin and mineral supplements, perhaps? Is it the chemicals in our food? Is it the pesticides, the chemical pesticides, as well as the chemical fertilizers being used? And so should they be eating organic food? Or is it inflammation? Or could it be even the gut microbiome? So, how can we make sense of all of these hype and all of these controversies? So, we can all agree that a healthy diet is important, and it does have multiple benefits. Even outside of mental and emotional health. However, it is becoming increasingly challenging and increasingly confusing to define what healthy foods are, or even what a healthy diet actually is. And so, when we are thinking about, or when we are considering how nutrition can impact or improve our mental health, there are several models to consider, particularly 5 models that we can consider. One is adding something to the diet. So this is either a vitamin, a mineral, or any other nutrient that is very key or important for brain health as well as mental health. So this essentially assumes that an individual might be deficient in a certain vitamin or mineral, and therefore when they supplement with it, then there is likely to be an improvement in their symptoms. Two is removing something from the diet. So this is assuming that there could be either a toxic substance or an allergen in the person's dietary pattern that needs to be removed in order to actually improve the individual's symptoms and to eventually enable them to go into remission. Number 3 is a combination of 1 and 2. So it is essentially eating a healthy diet, and we will be defining what a healthy diet is. Number 4 is the gut microbiome. We'll talk more about what that is exactly. And then finally, we have fasting and the ketogenic diet. So let's start with our first dietary intervention, which is adding something to the diet. So like I said, this assumes that an individual might be deficient in a certain vitamin, mineral, or nutrient that is key for brain health as well as for mental health. So the first one that we typically tend to look at is omega-3. So omega-3 is a fatty acid, and it's in the group of the polyunsaturated fats. And it is responsible for brain as well as mental health. So fish oil, which is essentially omega-3 supplement, fish oil contains 2 types of omega-3 fatty acids. So it contains EPA and DHA. And these 2 fatty acids are components of our cell membranes. So if we can go back to the science we learned in primary school when we were learning about the cell and the different cell organelles or the different components of the cell. So the cell membrane is essentially the outer part of our cells that protects the interior from the outside environment. And so omega-3 is what makes up our cell membranes, and it does have, very powerful anti-inflammatory functions within our body. So these 2 types of omega-3, EPA and DHA, they are almost exclusively found in fatty fish, such as salmon, tuna, mackerel, as well as fish oil. And therefore, it is very advisable for an individual, if fish is not a big part of your dietary pattern, if you rarely eat fish, or if you're just someone who does not enjoy maybe the smell or the taste of fish, it is advisable for you to then be on an omega-3 or a fish oil supplement, regardless of your age, regardless of, whether or not you have a mental health challenge, or even whether or not you have any chronic disease. So supplementation with omega-3 has been studied in mood disorders. So mood disorders are, for example, anxiety and depression. So supplementation with omega-3 has been studied in this group, and it has been shown to have or to be very effective with these depressive disorders in terms of alleviating those symptoms. It has also been studied in psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, and although the studies that have been done have been small, the results have been positive. So the reason why vitamin B9 is very important is because it is actually needed in the brain in order to make something we call neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are chemicals that enable the cells, your cells, to communicate with one another. And so if you look at, for example, people who have these mood disorders or people who have psychotic disorders, typically what they are facing is they either have too much of these chemicals or these neurotransmitters, or too little of these chemicals. So it's either too much or too little. And so folate is necessary for the formation of these neurotransmitters. For example, we have dopamine. Dopamine has other functions within the body, but it has been we do attach it to, for example, pleasure and motivation. But there's also serotonin, which is also another feel-good hormone as well. And then there's also norepinephrine. So there's a couple of them. So folate deficiency or vitamin B9 deficiency has been associated with the presence of depression, and it may actually hinder the response to antidepressants, meaning that if individuals who have, for example, depression, if they just use antidepressants without supplementing with vitamin B9, then it has actually been shown to, the antidepressants don't work as well as when an individual is using both, the medication as well as supplementing with B9. And so treatment with antidepressants only tends to produce relatively low remission rates. However, when treatment is combined with supplementation of vitamin B9, then remission rates have actually been shown to increase. So there are, of course, the dietary sources of vitamin B9. There's the vegetables, particularly the dark leafy vegetables. There's the fruits, nuts, legumes such as beans, seafood, dairy products, meat, poultry, grains, and so on. So next is vitamin E. So vitamin E is an antioxidant that binds to free radicals. So free radicals are unstable molecules that are formed during cell metabolism. And these free radicals can actually build up inside our cells and cause damage to, for example, our DNA. And this damage is what has been associated with, for example, the occurrence of diseases such as cancer. So the way that antioxidants work is that they destroy or they bind these free radicals, and vitamin E is one of those antioxidants. So what has been discovered is that people who have mood disorders, people who have schizophrenia, and even Alzheimer's disease or dementia, these are individuals who have elevated free radicals, meaning that they have more of these unstable or harmful molecules in their body. And so it has actually been discovered that, using or incorporating anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, substances into, an individual's dietary pattern has actually been shown to play a very big role in terms of, increasing the remission rates of depression as well as anxiety. However, supplementation with vitamin E has shown inconclusive results in terms of relieving both depression and anxiety. So that means that some studies have shown that vitamin E does have an impact, while others have shown that there hasn't been really much of a change. However, it is a vitamin or a nutrient that is worth considering, especially if you are going through any of these challenges. So, of course, there are the dietary sources. There's sunflower seeds, almonds, peanuts, spinach, pumpkin, and so on. Finally, we have vitamin D. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and it performs a wide range of functions. So when we look at our bone health, when we look at our skin health, hormonal health, vitamin D is very key for all of these. And of course, with regards to our topic, vitamin D is important for cognitive as well as mental health. Now, vitamin D is also an antioxidant, just like vitamin E. And so it works the same way in terms of destroying those free radicals, reducing oxidative stress as well as inflammation, which is actually very prevalent in individuals with these mood disorders such as depression and anxiety. So vitamin D also has neuroprotective properties, meaning that it also protects your brain cells or your brain tissues as well. So a deficiency in vitamin D is quite common, more than we would actually think, and not just in this group of individuals who have mood disorders or psychotic disorders, but even just generally in the general population. The reason behind this is because one, we of course live in a society where a bigger percentage of us are black, we are black or people of color. So a vitamin D deficiency is actually quite common, more than we actually think it is. And not just in this group of individuals who have psychotic disorders or mood disorders, but even in the general population, vitamin D deficiency is quite common. So we live in a country where majority of us are black people or people of color. And so because of the color of our skin or because of the pigmentation of our skin, when we go out into the sunlight, we actually don't make as much vitamin D as people who are, for example, white or, lighter skinned. So the darker your skin is, the less vitamin D your body is actually able to make. Secondly, we mostly, are staying indoors more and more. We are in our offices, in our homes, in our rooms. We barely, go outside. We barely interact with the outer environment. And so this does contribute to a deficiency in vitamin D. And thirdly, when you look at even the nutrient quality of our soil, it is one of the causes of, deficiencies these days. Because when you look at what modern agriculture has done, the focus with modern agriculture is on producing large quantities of food. Of course, to feed the ever-growing population. But the negative side of modern agriculture is that it has led to the depletion of the nutrients in our soil. And when you really think about it, where does the minerals and these nutrients in our food, where do they come from? And so that means that the food that is grown doesn't really have the nutrients that we need. If you compare the food that is being grown currently to the food that was being grown maybe 20, 50, 100 years ago, there's such a huge difference in terms of the nutrient quality. So you could be having a perfect diet, you could be having lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes and such. However, because of the impact of agriculture, you might not be getting, as much nutrients as you actually need. And so that's why supplementation is becoming more and more important, even for those of us who are still young, who don't have any chronic disease. It is something to consider. But as always, do not supplement blindly. Don't just walk into a pharmacy or a chemist and just take anything that you find. It is very important to get blood tests done to actually know where you are in terms of your vitamin D levels and in terms of really any other nutrients, in order for you to be guided, right? In order for your doctor to actually guide you or for your nutritionist to guide you on the right quantity for you that you need per day, rather than just, wasting your money on buying something that you might not really require. Number two, or our second intervention, is removing something from the diet. Now, elimination diets. So number two is removing something from the diet. So how this works is essentially eliminating a toxin or an allergen from an individual's dietary pattern and then monitoring how that individual will feel, of course, to see if there will be any improvement in their symptoms. So elimination diets systematically remove nutrients or substances from the diet, assuming that something in the diet could be causing or at least could be increasing the symptoms. So in psychiatry, these diets have actually been tried on children who have ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, as well as children who have autism. So for ADHD, artificial food colors are often eliminated. So these are typically found in ultra-processed foods. And then for autism, what is usually eliminated is gluten and casein. So gluten is a protein that is found in barley, wheat, as well as rye. And casein is the main protein that is found in milk. So typically with autism, parents are typically advised to, cut off foods that contain gluten or casein and then monitor how your child feels. But of course, other substances can still be part of this diet, and typically sugar is also one of the things that is commonly eliminated. However, this doesn't work for everyone, meaning that there are some people who do, notice an improvement in their symptoms. However, for others, there isn't really much of a difference. Our third intervention is healthy diet. So it is Our third intervention is both adding and removing food. So it's a combination of the first one and the second one. And essentially, it's all about eating a healthy diet. So, adding healthy foods and eliminating unhealthy foods may actually help to address some psychiatric disorders. And the best evidence for this is from a trial that was done. It was a randomized control trial that was done, and patients were divided into two groups. So, and these were patients who had moderate to severe depression, and they were divided into two groups. So, one group was advised to follow the Mediterranean diet, and the other group only went for counseling, or what you would call therapy or social support. And what they found at the end of the 12 weeks, so this is a trial that was, done for 12 weeks, and what they found is that there was a significantly greater improvement in the diet group compared to the control group, or the group that only went for therapy or counseling. So there was actually a 32% remission in the group that followed the Mediterranean diet, and only an 8% remission in the group that went for therapy only and did not change how they were eating. And of course, when I say remission, what I mean is that these individuals essentially healed. So they reported that the symptoms were completely gone, and they were able to live normal lives. So let me define what a Mediterranean diet is. So it is essentially a diet that contains or is high in whole grains, such as whole wheat, oats, brown rice, fruits and vegetables are of course a very big part of this diet as well. Seafood, legumes such as beans and lentils, as well as nuts and seeds. So when you hear Mediterranean diet, this is typically what we mean. And it has been shown to, not just be important even for, mental health or emotional health, but even for general, when you look at heart health, when you look at, reversing, issues such as hypertension or cardiovascular disease. It is a diet that has been widely used and widely recommended, and there is a lot of research, of course, backing this. So it is very, very effective. So our fourth intervention is the gut microbiome. So gut microbiome essentially refers to the trillions and trillions of bacteria, yeast, and fungi that mostly reside in your large intestine, or what we call your colon. So it's a collection of bacteria, yeast, as well as fungi. And like I said, there are trillions of them, about 38 trillion, and they are mostly found in your large intestine. Now, changes in gut microbiome composition are actually very common and have been observed in individuals who have depression. So what I mean by this is that in individuals who have depression, what has been observed is that they have more of the bad bacteria, meaning the bacteria that increases inflammation, increases the risk of chronic disease, and less of the good bacteria that helps to reduce inflammation and promotes, or has benefits for very many components of your health, because this gut microbiome, or these microbes, are not just important for your digestive health, but they are important even for your heart health, for brain health, for your immunity particularly. A lot of people don't know just how much these microbes actually will determine how strong or how weak your immune system is. And so, of course, even with regards to mental and emotional health, it does play a huge role. And like I said, typically with individuals who have any of these mental health challenges, more commonly we find that they have more of the bad bacteria and less of the good bacteria. There's also something that we call the gut-brain axis, which essentially talks about how our digestive system and our brain are constantly connected or in constant communication. And for a long time, even in the field of science, a few years ago, we believed that the brain and the digestive system are two separate entities and they work independently. However, what we now know is that your brain as well as your gut or your digestive system are in constant communication with one another, and they do play a very critical role in terms of regulating your behavior as well as your mood. So that explains why, for example, when you have fearful thoughts, you will also feel it in your body. So you'll feel, for example, the tightening or the cramping in your stomach, or when you're nervous, for example, right, you'll feel what we call the butterflies. So it just shows how they are, very much connected. So this is where probiotic supplementation came in. And probiotics have become a very big, it's something that a lot of people are now very familiar with. You'll find, of course, there are the probiotic medications, but there are, for example, the probiotic yogurts, which are constantly being marketed or advertised. And whenever you walk into any supermarket, really, you're bound to, interact or, find any of these products. So this is where probiotic supplementation came in, and probiotics are becoming more and more, people are more and more familiar with the term probiotics. There are a lot of products that are being marketed, for example, the probiotic yogurts, which you are bound to interact with or, find when you walk into a supermarket. And there's, of course, the probiotic medications. So the reason why these probiotics are important is because they really help to restore healthy gut microbiome, meaning that they actually help to reintroduce the healthy or the good bacteria that you actually want. And probiotic supplementation in individuals who have depression or who have anxiety has actually been studied, and the results have actually been quite promising in terms of helping to reduce depressive symptoms. But of course, there are the food sources of these probiotics. So there are, of course, apart from the probiotic yogurt, there are the fermented foods. So there's fermented milk, there's sauerkraut, which is fermented yogurt, and so much more. There's kimchi, which is pickled or fermented vegetables. So you don't need to buy, the medications themselves. However, you can. But you can still get these healthy bacteria even from fermented foods. And our last intervention is fasting and the ketogenic diet. So fasting and the ketogenic diet have been studied, particularly in the treatment of epilepsy. And it has actually had very, very good results in terms of reducing the frequency of seizures in individuals who have epilepsy. So our last intervention is fasting and the ketogenic diet. So fasting and the ketogenic diet have been used in the treatment of epilepsy, and the results have been very positive. So both fasting and the ketogenic diet have shown to be very effective in the treatment of epilepsy, and that is with regards to reducing the frequency of seizures that individuals with epilepsy, will experience in a day. So the ketogenic diet has also been proven to be effective for treatment-resistant epileptic seizures. So our last intervention is fasting and the ketogenic diet. So both fasting and the ketogenic diet have been used in the treatment of epilepsy, and the results have been quite impressive. So it has actually, both fasting and the keto diet have actually been shown to, reduce the frequency of seizures in individuals who have epilepsy. And when it comes to the keto diet, it has been proven to be effective for treatment-resistant epileptic seizures. So this is a group of people who have epilepsy who have not really responded well to medications, and when they were told to try the ketogenic diet, or when they tried the ketogenic diet, it actually was proven to be effective. And the reason behind this is because the keto diet actually helps to reduce the excitability of neurons in the brain. So for individuals who have epilepsy, what is happening is typically there is what we call an overexcitement of neurons in the brain. So a ketogenic diet now helps to reduce the excitability of neurons in the brain, and this is what then helps to reduce, the frequency of seizures that this individual would experience. So the keto diet is essentially a diet that is very low in carbs, it is high in fat, and it has many similarities to the Atkins as well as the low carb diets. And it involves drastically reducing your carb intake and replacing it with fat. So what happens is usually our bodies use glucose as a source of energy. So usually what happens is our bodies use glucose as a source of energy. And of course, glucose comes from the breakdown or the digestion of carbohydrates. So what happens when an individual goes on a keto diet is that now the body, instead of going for carbs or going for glucose as a source of energy, it goes for fat as a source of energy. And so when the body goes for fat as a source of energy, it breaks down the fat, and what is produced are substances called ketones. So ketones are now what your body cells will use, or what your body will use for energy instead of glucose. And so when your body is using ketones for energy, it puts your body into a metabolic state called ketosis. Now, there are several versions of the ketogenic diet. So there are several versions of the ketogenic diet. So one, we have the standard ketogenic diet. So this is a very low carb diet. Like I said, there's moderate protein and it is high in fat. So it typically contains about 70% fat, 20% protein, and only 10% of, a person's calories will come from carbs. And then there's the high protein ketogenic diet, which is similar to the standard one. However, here there's more protein. So the ratio is often 60% fat, 35% of the calories coming from protein, and only 5% of calories coming from carbohydrate sources. So I'd like to talk about a study that was done by Stanford medical researchers just to really demonstrate how effective the keto diet is, or has been shown to be effective for individuals who have both mood disorders as well as psychotic disorders. So this is a trial or a study that was done for 4 months, and it involved 21 adult participants, and these 21 adult participants were diagnosed with either schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and they were also taking antipsychotic medications, and on top of that they also had a metabolic abnormality, meaning that they either had excess weight, insulin resistance, which is what causes type 2 diabetes, or their cholesterol levels were elevated, so they had more of the bad cholesterol and less of the good, or they had impaired glucose tolerance. So these participants were instructed to follow the ketogenic diet, with approximately 10% of calories coming from carbs, 30% from protein, and 60% from fat. Now the focus was on going for whole non-processed foods, as well as going for non-starchy vegetables such as, for example, broccoli, cauliflower, tomatoes, onions and such. And of course, not restricting the fat intake. So the research team also tracked how well these participants were adhering to this diet. And the way they tracked or assessed, the level of adherence to this diet is by weekly measures of blood ketone levels. So like I said, when your body goes for fat as a source of energy, it breaks down the fat and forms ketones, which your body now uses for energy instead of glucose. And this can actually be measured, from the blood. Previously, we were using urine. We were using urine sticks to measure the level of ketones. However, with the urine, it's actually not, it doesn't give a very clear picture, or it's not very effective in terms of giving, the correct picture of whether this individual is actually using ketones for energy or not. However, with a blood test, with a blood ketone test, it's actually much more effective. So they checked the individual's blood ketone levels, And of course, these participants also underwent psychiatric as well as metabolic assessments throughout these, 4 months of the trial. Now, after the 4 months, after being on the ketogenic diet for 4 months, none of the participants had metabolic syndrome, meaning that the participants lost 10% of their body weight, their waist circumference reduced by 11%, their blood pressure was better controlled. So for those who had, elevated blood pressure, it actually was lowered. Their BMI was also lowered. Their cholesterol levels were actually improved as well, and even their blood sugar levels as well as their level of insulin resistance also improved. And apart from the benefits in terms of the metabolic aspect, there was a huge improvement even in their symptoms, their mental and emotional symptoms. So the participants actually reported improvements in their energy levels, in their sleep, in their mood, their quality of life, and overall they reported feeling healthier and more hopeful. And so this just demonstrates how these ketones have, very powerful anti-inflammatory effects and actually help to protect our brain cells. Now, like I mentioned, fasting is also very key in this. And fasting also works the same way as the keto diet, meaning that fasting, the purpose of fasting is essentially to also put your body in a state of ketosis where it's using ketones or where it's burning fat for energy. So when you don't eat for an extended period of time, your body will of course use up the stores of glucose in your body, and afterward it will switch to fat. It will switch to burning fat, in order to release energy. And so fasting involves both intermittent fasting as well as the longer fasts. So intermittent fasting, typically the model that people are more familiar with is the 16-8 method, where you fast for 16 hours and then you have an 8-hour window period to eat. So you don't even have to fast for 16 hours in order to go into that state of ketosis. You could even do a 12-hour fast, which is typically what we do. So for example, if let's say you have your first meal of the day at 8 a.m. and your last meal of the day by 8 p.m. you're done eating. So what that means is that between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. you will have fasted for 12 hours. So 12 hours is not a very difficult fast to do. And it actually can be enough to put your body into that state of using ketones as a source of energy. And then of course, like I mentioned, there's the longer fasts where individuals will choose to only drink water for 2 days, 3 days, and even more. But of course you don't have to go to those extremes. So in conclusion, as with most things, really the response to these 5 nutrition interventions that we have discussed really depends on the individual. So an individualized or personalized approach is always recommended, meaning that it might not be possible, for example, for an individual who has depression to follow a keto diet. Particularly when you look at the ketogenic diet, it is one of those diets that are very expensive. They're quite costly to to be consistent with, over a few months at least, because of course in order to actually see the benefits of something, you need to do it for a couple of months or a couple of weeks. So it is something that is quite difficult to sustain just because of how expensive it is. And so it's definitely not for everyone. Not everyone can follow it, and there's no shame in that. It's really all about going for something that an individual is able to afford, is able to access easily, and something that is just feasible. So it is important to always go for something that an individual can afford, something that an individual can easily access wherever they are, and of course something that is also feasible, meaning that it's actually doable, and it doesn't really put a lot of strain or put a lot of friction, right? Because remember, whenever you're trying to incorporate a healthy habit, no matter what it is, it's always best to start small, start with something that doesn't cause a lot of friction, fits into your routine much easily, in order for you to actually be able to stick with it long term. And so that's why, an individualized approach is always recommended. And of course, traditional approaches, treatment approaches to these mental health challenges, such as therapy and medication, still do have their place. So I'm not negating in any way, the importance of medication or the importance of therapy. But what I am saying is that, it is more and more important now to actually consider an individual's dietary pattern, assessing their dietary pattern, in order to actually identify, any possible treatment options. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I trust that it was educative and informative for you. Remember, you can now find us on YouTube, on Ikra FM's YouTube channel. You will be able to come across some of the recordings that we have done. And I trust, as always, that this is something that is educative, informative, and something that actually enables you to take a few steps to improve your health. That's it from me. Ma'asalam.